My name is Tessa Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, and this is what really happened. The first thing I remember is the sound. Not my mother's voice, not yet. It was the room, the soft, expensive sound of a place trying very hard to look beautiful enough to hide whatever ugly thing might happen inside it. Champagne flutes touched in little crystal notes, forks clicked against white plates. Linen napkins opened with that brushed whisper rich places always have, as if even fabric there knows it is being watched. String lights burned amber over the courtyard of the boutique hotel outside Asheville. Fresh roses floated in shallow crystal bowls. Buttered dinner rolls sweated warmth into silver baskets. Perfume drifted through the patio in polished layers. Clean floral vanilla, something citrus sharp and expensive. The outdoor heaters ticked on and off along the stone wall, with tiny metallic clicks that kept slipping through the music. Beyond all that, the mountains were dark, still, waiting, like the world outside already knew something the room had not caught up to yet. I stood near the head table in the ivory dress I had changed into after the rehearsal walkthrough. My heels hurt. The smile on my face had already started to feel rented. My shoulders were straight because that too had been part of my training. My fiancé, Noah Bennett, was across the courtyard talking to his uncle from Charlotte, one hand in his pocket, tie loosened just enough to look relaxed without looking careless. My future mother-in-law, Denise, was laughing softly near the center table. My maid of honor, Alana, was by the bar with two bridesmaids, Mez still checking tomorrow's timelines on her phone because she trusted paper more than memory, and I trusted her for exactly that reason. And my mother. My mother was glowing. That should have warned me. Some women glow because they're happy. Some glow because attention lands on them like sunlight, and they've spent 40 years teaching themselves how to turn toward it. My mother, Renee Whitmore, had never entered a room quietly. She arrived inside it, claimed it, bent it a few degrees toward herself without seeming to move a single piece of furniture. That night she wore deep green satin, diamonds at her ears, and the smile she saved for public moments when she intended to be remembered later. Beside her stood my sister Paige in pale blue silk, one shoulder bare, and her hair swept into the kind of polished knot that only looks effortless if effort has been happening for hours. Paige had always known how to wear admiration lightly enough that people mistook it for innocence. That was part of the problem, not all of it. But part. It was my rehearsal dinner, my night, my guests, my wedding the next morning. And even before the first speech, I already felt that old, familiar thing creeping up the back of my neck. That sensation that I had somehow been invited too close to the center of something that would, eventually, be handed back to the prettier daughter. A bridesmaid laughed near the dessert display. A waiter set down another bread basket. Then my mother reached for the microphone, and everything changed. Us music was still playing, some acoustic version of an old love song, but suddenly it sounded far away, as if the whole courtyard had slid behind glass. Chairs shifted. Heads turned. The wedding coordinator, Bree, looked up from the service station where she'd been checking tomorrow's ceremony layout. One of Noah's cousins stopped mid-sentence. A waiter froze with a tray balanced against his palm. My mother lifted her glass, microphone in one hand, champagne in the other, and smiled. Too long. That was the first cut. Not the words. The pause. Because I knew that pause. I had lived inside that pause my whole life. It was the tiny inhalation before she decided who would be loved out loud and who would be translated into usefulness. "Tonight," she said, "is such a special night." People smiled automatically. A few guests turned toward Noah and me with that warm expression people wear when they think they are about to witness family tenderness. I smiled back because girls like me learn early that public scenes are never won in the first minute. Public scenes are managed in the face. My mother let her gaze travel over the tables, then over me, then past me, and land exactly where I knew it would. "Of course," she said. "This is about Tessa and Noah." A few polite laughs, a few nods. The room relaxed. Then she tilted the glass toward Paige. But I have to say something about my beautiful Paige. The body notices ridiculous things when humiliation arrives dressed for dinner. Not broad things, tiny ones. The exact chill of the champagne flute stem in my hand. The smell of warm butter from the rolls turning suddenly sickening. Yes, the faint hiss of a patio heater at my back. A groomsman at table 4 stopping with his fork halfway to his mouth. One of Noah's aunts blinking hard and shifting in her chair. A woman from Paige's non-profit circle smiling at first, then not. My mother turned fully toward my sister, softened, opened herself into that bright, generous tone she never had to fake for Paige. "You have always been the shining one," she said. "The graceful one. The daughter who makes everything look easy." Paige pressed a hand to her chest, smiled modestly, accepted it. That part mattered. People always ask later if the golden child knew. Sometimes they didn't know everything. Sometimes they didn't start it. But they accepted it. They breathed it in. That they let the story settle on their shoulders like a shawl and never once asked whose skin it had been taken from. My mother kept going. "You are the one who has always carried this family with your heart, your beauty, your generosity. I don't know what I would do without you." The courtyard didn't explode. That would have been cleaner. It listened. That was worse. The wrongness moved table to table in small private waves. Noah's jaw tightened where he stood. Denise set her napkin down very carefully. My father looked into his whiskey as though amber liquid might explain how a man could watch the same pattern for decades and still call himself peaceful for not interrupting it. Bree went completely still by the service entrance, and Paige stood there shining, taking it. When my mother finally circled back to me, it landed even harder. "And of course, Tessa has always been so strong," she said. "So practical. She always lands on her feet." Strong. Practical. There they were. The words people use for daughters whose pain has become infrastructure. The applause that followed came scattered and embarrassed, like rain hitting different windows of the same house. Not celebration. Reflex. The kind of clapping people do when they aren't sure whether they've just seen cruelty or merely bad taste, and need a second to understand which weather system moved in. I stood there smiling. That, more than anything, had been the family discipline. Smile while she praises Paige for what you did. Smile while the story gets reassigned. Smile while the labor balances in your direction and the credit floats the other way. A smile because objecting would be awkward. Smile because awkwardness, in my family, had always been treated like the greater sin. I had seen the same movie when I was 12 and spent 2 nights wrapping Christmas gifts for half the family while Paige went to a holiday dance. Then listened to Mom gush to relatives about how festive Paige made the season feel. At 16, when I won an academic award and Mom missed the ceremony because Paige was crying over a boy in the parking lot, and Dad later bought me a hot chocolate and said, "You know how your mother gets." As if she were weather. As if I should adjust to her with layered clothing and lowered expectations. At 23, when I transferred money to help cover an overdue mortgage payment, and 2 weeks later, heard my mother tell a church friend how Paige had really been the emotional backbone of the family during a hard season. Emotionally, I paid the bill. Paige posted a quote about resilience over a sunset photo. That was my family in one frame. At 10, I learned to smile through it. At 19, I learned to leave the room before I said something irreversible. At 29, at my own wedding rehearsal dinner, I learned what it feels like when a room that was supposed to witness your joy gets reassigned in front of you. You can dress a wound in string lights and white linen and roses floating in crystal. It still bleeds. Noah started toward me then. I saw it in the shift of his shoulders before he took the first step. Even from across the patio, I knew what he intended to do. Come stand beside me, put his body next to mine, create a human wall between me and whatever was happening publicly to my face. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Not because I was okay, because I knew my mother. If he moved too soon, she would cry. She would say she had only been trying to honor both daughters. She would turn the room away from her cruelty and toward my reaction. She had done that pivot all my life. She could set a fire in the middle of a room and then, hand to chest, ask why everyone was being so dramatic about smoke. So I did something I had never done before. I let it sit. I let the silence after her toast settle where it wanted. I let every guest feel the shape of it. I let Noah's family register, in their own bones, and that something had gone wrong, and I was not going to race in to make it comfortable for them. That was the first moment of the night that belonged to me. Paige reached me first. Of course she did, still holding her champagne, still polished, still speaking softly enough that anyone overhearing could tell themselves this was a loving sister trying to smooth something tender. "Tess," she said, "you know Mom didn't mean anything by it." I looked at her. Did she not? Her smile flickered. It was emotional. She got carried away. "Interesting," I said. "How she only gets carried away in one direction." I didn't raise my voice, didn't shake, didn't make a scene. That seemed to unsettle Paige more than tears would have. Calm has always made manipulative systems nervous. If you stay calm, they can't label you unstable fast enough to outrun the facts. My father still hadn't looked up. That was his talent. He wasn't a cruel man. That would have been easier. Cruelty has edges. You can point at it. My father was gentle in all the ways that required nothing and absent in all the ways that mattered. He believed he was preserving peace when really he was preserving the comfort of the loudest person in the room. When I was 14 and Mom forgot my debate final because Paige had a breakup, he told me, "You know how your mother gets." When I was 23 and transferred money to help save the house from a late payment spiral, he hugged me in the bank parking lot like I had saved all of them. Then he let Mom turn around and tell people Paige had helped carry the family through a difficult season. That was him. Grateful in private, cowardly in public. Noah reached me then. He didn't ask if I was okay. One of the reasons I loved him was that he respected language too much to waste it on visible lies. He simply took the champagne flute from my hand before I snapped the stem without realizing it. "You want to leave?" he asked quietly. "Not yet." He held my eyes for one beat, nodded, kissed my temple. No performance, no heroics, just contact. Steady. Real. He knew enough by then, not just the incidents, the system. He knew who called when legal forms needed reviewing, when insurance letters arrived, when deed corrections had to be filed, when county paperwork became too confusing, when a billing error needed fixing, when a medication appeal had to be worded correctly or it would get denied. But he knew who texted me after midnight with screenshots and panic and the phrase "just one quick question." He also knew about the folder, the secret under all of it, the thing I had carried too long, because once proof exists, it stops being an abstract comfort and starts becoming a question. Are you going to keep surviving around the lie, or are you finally going to let it collapse? A month before the wedding, I had told Noah everything. It was 12:40 in the morning. We were barefoot in our apartment kitchen. The lease renewal papers were on the counter. A grocery receipt had somehow stuck to the bottom of my foot for half a minute while I talked. Fluorescent under-cabinet light made everything look tired and honest. There was stale coffee in the sink and one dish towel hanging crookedly off the oven handle. It felt right somehow. See that the truth came out there. Not at some dramatic table, not in tears, not in thunder, just in a kitchen with rent paperwork, dish soap, and two people too tired to romanticize anything. My mother had spent years telling people Paige was the daughter who stepped up when Grandma Eleanor got sick, the daughter who put life on hold, the daughter who sacrificed, the daughter who stayed. That story had moved through church circles, family gatherings, recommendation letters, donor conversations, sympathy dinners, and eventually Paige's professional life. It had become part of her image, her moral atmosphere, her credibility. The problem was, it was mostly fiction. Grandma lived with me, not Paige. I handled the intake forms when home care was first being discussed. I sat in waiting rooms. As I took unpaid days off work for discharge meetings, I called pharmacies at 9:40 p.m. because the blood pressure medication was delayed again. I untangled oxygen tubing from the leg of a recliner. I rerouted Social Security deposits after an account problem. I drove through freezing rain for prescriptions. I corrected insurance codes under fluorescent lights while a woman at a desk kept telling me the system was down. I spooned soup into Grandma on days she forgot lunch existed. I stayed up on coughing nights. I bought the humidifier. I cleaned up after the vomiting. I learned the strange private logistics of decline, the smell of antiseptic wipes, the rhythm of pill organizers, the quiet panic of hearing a bathroom thud at 2:11 a.m. Paige came by with macarons twice, once for a photo. My mother knew that. And she knew every inch of it. She also knew the prettier story was better. Paige looked like the kind of woman people wanted sacrifice to belong to. Graceful, polished, soft around the edges, emotionally photogenic. I reflected utility. And useful daughters do not get myths built around them. Grandma knew better. A week after the funeral, I was called to the office of her estate attorney, Martin Bell. I assumed it was routine. A signature, some question about the lake cottage, something tax-related, something boring. Martin was in his 60s, silver-haired, rimless glasses, careful voice, the kind of man who knew exactly how much damage one sentence could do and still said it anyway if the record required it. He closed the office door, folded his hands, and told me there was a personal matter attached to the estate. Sure, then he opened a sealed letter from my grandmother and put a navy folder on the desk in front of me. Inside were documents that made my hands go cold. 8 months before her death, Grandma had revised parts of her estate planning after discovering that my mother had quietly borrowed against a family trust years earlier, and later half-corrected the damage through a property arrangement tied to the sale of the lake cottage. An arrangement that disproportionately benefited debts connected to my mother and, in practice, Paige. Not illegal enough to explode on its own. Not clean enough to survive sunlight. Under that were records of my financial support over 6 years. Mortgage rescue payments, hospital transportation costs, emergency dental coverage for Dad, insurance gaps, pharmacy runs, deposits. Assisted living advances before Grandma moved in with me instead. Small numbers if you looked one at a time. A whole life if you didn't. Nearly $43,000 in direct family support. Unacknowledged. Unreimbursed. Sometimes quietly reassigned. And the ugliest part sat beneath all of it. My mother had told relatives, family friends, church contacts, and later people in Paige's professional orbit that Paige had delayed parts of her life to help care for Grandma. That story had earned sympathy, recommendations, soft prestige, extra moral authority, the kind of social credit that opens nonprofit doors and makes women seem more luminous than they are. That prestige had been built, in part, out of my work. Martin had watched me absorb that for a long time. Then he said, "Well, your grandmother anticipated continued misrepresentation." I remember that exact word. Misrepresentation. Such a bloodless way to describe theft. He explained that Grandma had included a signed corrective statement, witnessed and sealed, instructing that if false narratives persisted regarding caregiving, contribution, or family support, the record should correct itself without regard for family discomfort. Without regard for family discomfort. I stared at that line for a very long time. Martin advised patience. He told me documentation was not revenge. He told me truth remains true even when delayed. He told me I did not have to blow up my life before I was ready. I kept the folder in our home safe. Not because I doubted the truth, because I was tired of being the only one holding it. Back in the courtyard, and after the toast, my mother was moving through the tables accepting compliments as if she had delivered something touching instead of something poisonous. Paige floated beside her, modest and luminous. A few people from Atlanta and Charlotte, professional contacts of hers, donor types, advisory board types, the kinds of people who say meaningful work with their whole face, smiled at her with impressed warmth. Now, looking back, I should have seen it sooner. The rehearsal dinner wasn't just a dinner to them, it was a room full of witnesses, useful witnesses, strategic witnesses, my wedding as backdrop, Paige as feature presentation. Denise came over. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "I'm sorry." Just that. No theater, no exaggerated alliance, no trashing my mother to prove loyalty. "I know," I said. She glanced toward my mother, yet then back at me. That was not normal. "No." Mark, Noah's father, drifted closer but stopped far enough away to remain respectful. He had the instinct of a decent man, come near enough to help, not near enough to take over. "Need the coordinator?" he asked. "Not yet." He nodded and stepped back. Bree was near the service station pretending to review dessert timing, while very obviously tracking the emotional temperature of the courtyard. She had the face of a woman who had handled weather delays, missing boutonnieres, drunk uncles, one bride who lost her shoes, and a groom who'd thrown up into hydrangeas. Human collapse in formal wear did not surprise her. I could have gone upstairs then, locked the bridal suite, let the room invent a story that comforted itself. But there comes a point when leaving is not peace. How sometimes leaving is just one more service you provide to the wrong person. My phone buzzed. It was in Noah's hand. He glanced down, then looked at me. "Martin Bell." Everything inside me sharpened. A lawyer does not call casually at 8:30 on a Friday night. I held out my hand. Noah passed me the phone. "Excuse me," I said, stepping away from the tables toward the hydrangeas along the stone path. Before I could answer, my mother's voice rang out behind me. "Tessa, don't go vanishing from your own rehearsal dinner." A few heads turned again. That was one of her gifts, making even your exit sound selfish. I took the call. "Martin?" His voice came through clipped and careful. "Tessa, I'm sorry for the timing. I need to tell you something immediately." I moved farther toward the edge of the patio. At the sounds behind me narrowed, the clink of cutlery, a laugh trying and failing to restart, a heater ticking on. "What happened?" "I was contacted this evening by representatives from the Avery Foundation Board," he said. "They requested confirmation of supporting documentation attached to Paige Harmon's nomination portfolio." For a second, my brain didn't catch. Then it did. A month earlier, Paige had mentioned some leadership recognition in Atlanta. Emerging service leader, rising voice, some polished title designed to sound humble and expensive at the same time. Mom had glowed over dinner while describing how beautiful it was that Paige's dedication to others was finally being recognized. I had cut chicken on my plate and said nothing. "What documentation?" I asked. "The caregiver statement," Martin said. "Ah, the one attributed to your mother and supported with references to Eleanor's final years." I closed my eyes. "Go on." "The board cross-checked the timeline after receiving an anonymous concern. They asked whether Paige was the primary caregiver and whether she personally covered associated expenses." Noah had moved closer by then, not touching, just there. "And?" I asked. "I told them the legal file does not support that claim." There it was, clean, simple, devastating. All at once, the room behind me rearranged itself in my head, the donor contacts, the extra shine in my mother's face, the strategic timing of the toast, the way Paige had been lit, verbally and socially, in front of exactly the kinds of people who might admire sacrifice. My rehearsal dinner wasn't just my rehearsal dinner. It was a showcase, for Paige, and on my tab, in my room, with my guests, with my wedding as stage design. "Did you have authority to say that?" I asked. Yes, Martin said. Paige signed a release authorizing verification in her submission materials. Of course she had. She used it again, I said. Yes. I looked back across the courtyard. My mother was laughing with one of Noah's cousins, hand resting lightly on a chair, perfectly composed. Paige touched someone's arm and tilted her head in that practiced, empathetic way she used professionally. The whole scene looked dipped in honey. Martin continued. There is more. The board also received payment records and reference to Eleanor's corrective statement. They asked whether the misrepresentation appeared deliberate. I said I could verify the documentary record but would not speculate on motive. Good. And that was why Martin Bell cost money. Why are you calling me tonight? I asked. A pause. Because approximately 1 hour ago, your mother left me a voicemail threatening legal action if I interfered with Paige's future over what she called family storytelling. She identified where you are. She said tonight was an important showcase for Paige among donors and professional contacts. Showcase, he said the word. And something old inside me rose up for 1 second. That reflex, the old script. Protect them, absorb it, deal with it later. Don't ruin tomorrow. Be reasonable, be strong, be practical. The same language that had built a cage around my life came back dressed as maturity and knocked politely. Then I looked up. My mother raised her glass again. Paige laughed. My wedding, my room, my guests, their campaign stop. Hi, Martin, might I said, are you at your office? Yes. Can you hold? Of course. I lowered the phone and looked at Noah. They used Grandma's caregiving story in Paige's award portfolio again. His face changed. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. The terrible relief of finally seeing the system expose itself without your help. What do you want to do? He asked. I took one breath, then another. Then I said very quietly, I'm done paying for silence. Noah nodded once, like he had been waiting years to hear that sentence. The nearest guests had gone still enough to notice. Denise, Mark, Alana, one of Noah's aunts, maybe two of Paige's donor contacts. Not exactly eavesdropping. Listening the way human bodies do when the emotional pressure in a room drops so suddenly everyone can feel it in their teeth. My mother noticed that stillness and started toward us with Paige half a step behind. What is going on? Mom asked, smiling for the audience. I looked at her. For the first time in my life, I did not hurry to make things easier. You tell me. She laughed lightly. Tessa, honey, not tonight. That word, honey, always sounded sweet to outsiders. To me, it sounded like silk laid over broken glass. Paige folded her arms. If this is about the toast, you're making it bigger than it was. I held up one finger. Then I put Martin on speaker. Martin, are you still there? Yes. My mother's face changed. Tiny shift. Enough, she knew the name. Please repeat, I said. Clearly, what you just told me about the Avery Foundation inquiry. The patio didn't freeze. It listened. Martin's voice came out crisp through the speaker. This evening, I was contacted by representatives verifying claims made in Paige Harmon's nomination materials regarding primary caregiving and financial support for Eleanor Whitmore during her final years. The documentary record does not support those claims. Paige's fingers loosened around her glass. My mother stepped forward fast. Tessa, turn that off. I didn't move. Martin continued. The record supports that you, Tessa Whitmore, provided the majority of direct care, housing, transportation, and financial support. I also confirmed that estate records contain a signed statement by Eleanor Whitmore correcting prior family misrepresentations on the matter. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped sharply over stone. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," too softly to own it. This is completely inappropriate, my mother said. When I looked at her, is it inaccurate? She glanced at the tables instead of at me. That told me everything. Paige found her voice first. I never said I was the only caregiver. Martin answered before I could. The issue is not whether you were the only caregiver. The issue is whether you represented yourself as the primary caregiver and principal financial support. The color left Paige's face in a slow, awful wave. Mom lifted her chin. This is legal harassment over family language. Martin didn't flinch. Mrs. Whitmore, you left me a voicemail 1 hour ago threatening action if verified facts interfered with your daughter's recognition. I retained that message. That landed hardest, because suddenly this was no longer a sensitive bride and two difficult women and family tension and wedding stress. It was records, releases, a voicemail, a lawyer, a file, a woman who had counted on feelings outrunning paperwork discovering they couldn't. My father stood then, whiskey untouched. Renee, he said. Just her name. But for once it didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like shame. She rounded on him. Do not do this here. He looked older than I had ever seen him. You already did. Denise had reached my side by then. Her hand brushed lightly against my arm, not pulling, not claiming, just there, anchoring. One of Paige's donor contacts stared between her and my mother with the expression people get when they realize they have been charmed inside a lie. Paige swallowed. I helped, she said. Everyone knows I helped. You came for photos, I said. She flinched. I could have listed everything. The oxygen tubing, the midnight pharmacy runs, the humidifier, the hospital chair that left a metal pattern on the backs of my thighs, the soup in paper cups, the insurance hold music, the blood on a washcloth, the unpaid time off, the panic, the exhaustion. The way Grandma once woke up scared and held my wrist until morning because she no longer knew what room she was in. I could have said all of it. I didn't. Exact truth cuts deeper than dramatic truth. Martin spoke again. To answer your earlier question, Tessa, if this matter escalates publicly, the estate is prepared to release Eleanor Whitmore's sealed corrective statement under the conditions she specified. Additionally, there are records of reimbursement gaps and unauthorized narrative use tied to prior family solicitations, unauthorized narrative use, and a legal phrase so cold it almost became elegant, a bloodless way to say they had been building halo light from my labor. My mother reached toward the phone like she could stop language once it had entered the air. Noah stepped between us, not aggressively, just finally. Don't, he said. She stared at him as though other people's boundaries still surprised her. This is family business. Then maybe your family should have handled it. For 3 years, Noah had been courteous around my mother, in a way I appreciated and sometimes resented because I wanted someone, anyone, to say the plain thing. He said it then. Tears flooded my mother's eyes almost instantly. Another old move. She could summon woundedness the way some people reach for a wrap when the evening cools. I cannot believe you would humiliate your sister like this. There it was, the final trick. She set the fire, then accused me of smoke. At my rehearsal dinner? I asked. My voice stayed quiet. That made it travel farther. You used my wedding event to showcase Paige to donors and contacts. You praised her for sacrifices I made. You built her public story out of my labor. And now I'm the humiliation? No one moved to comfort her. That was new. She looked around the patio and saw, maybe for the first time in years, that the room had moved beyond her reach. Not because I outperformed her, because facts had. Paige's voice cracked. Mom, say something. Mom couldn't. Every available option was bad. Deny it, and Martin's records existed. Minimize it, and the room already understood enough. Cry harder. Yeah, and she risked looking manipulative to people who had not been conditioned by her for decades. So she reached for the softer lie. Tessa, sweetheart, you know I've always been proud of you. You're so capable. You never needed the same kind of support. For 1 second, I almost laughed. That line, that old poisoned compliment. People tell dependable daughters that as if neglect were admiration, as if not being nurtured were evidence of superior construction. No, it is the script that keeps the burden where they want it. I turned to Paige. Did you know your portfolio said you were Grandma's primary caregiver? She hesitated. Mom handled the language. That was not an answer. That was cowardice wearing paperwork. Did you submit it? She said nothing. That was enough. Alana, who had known me since sophomore year of college and once ended an engagement after finding spreadsheets of lies on her ex's laptop, leaned back in her chair and set down her fork with the expression she gets right before deleting a person permanently from her internal system. Denise spoke then, and when she did, people listened because she had stayed quiet long enough to earn the weight of it. Renee, she said, I have been trying to understand why a mother would use her daughter's rehearsal dinner to honor another child. I understand now. You thought the wrong people knew the truth. My mother blinked at her. This is not your business. Denise didn't raise her voice. You made it our business when you did it in front of our family. And our guests, Mark added. Something shifted in Paige's face then. Not innocence. That had left the building years earlier. Confidence, maybe. Confidence in the old system. The old, seamless thing where Mom framed, Dad hesitated, I absorbed, outsiders assumed, and Paige floated above the labor like perfume. Systems fail when the load-bearing wall stops volunteering. I took the phone off speaker. Thank you, Martin. I'll call you tomorrow. I'm sorry it happened this way, he said. No, I said, looking straight at my mother. I'm not. I ended the call. The silence that followed had weight, real weight. A waiter appeared at the edge of the courtyard with a tray of miniature crab cakes and visibly reconsidered entering history. My father came toward me then. Not to my mother, not to Paige, to me. He stopped 2 feet away, as if even he understood that closeness had become conditional. I should have told the truth a long time ago, he said. It wasn't enough. Nothing that late ever is. Yes, I said. He nodded once, like a man hearing his own verdict. Paige stared at him. Dad? He didn't rescue her either. The stars had started showing between the string lights. Somewhere beyond the hotel wall, traffic moved along the mountain road. A fountain near the side entrance kept spilling water into itself as if nothing important had happened. That is one of the cruelest parts of public collapse. The world stays normal. Water falls. Waiters clear plates. Music restarts in nervous little pieces. Someone asks for more butter. My mother straightened her shoulders. We are not doing this tonight, she said. Tessa, you are emotional. We will talk privately tomorrow. There it was, the trap. I drag it behind a door, sand it down, rewrite, reassign. By breakfast, I'd be the unstable bride, and she'd be the exhausted mother who meant well. No, I said. She frowned. No? No private cleanup. No tomorrow version where I'm dramatic and you're misunderstood. She stared at me. You've had 29 years of private access, I said. You used it to edit me out. That hit. Paige's lower lip trembled. Maybe once, a few years earlier, I would have felt sorry for her in that moment. But sympathy has limits when it keeps charging the wrong account. I never asked for any of this, she whispered. You cashed it anyway. Noah exhaled beside me. He knew that sentence had closed something. Bree, the coordinator, approached with the careful dignity of a woman entering a courtroom disguised as a rehearsal dinner. Tessa, she said quietly. Whatever you need, we can adjust the schedule. Practical women save lives in unglamorous ways. I looked around the courtyard. My college friends, Noah's cousins, 2 elderly neighbors from my building who had watched me haul wedding decor up 3 flights of stairs all month. My Aunt Cheryl from Ohio, the pastor, The photographer hired for candid rehearsal shots, now holding a camera full of expressions nobody could crop into innocence. The florist's assistant pretending to be fascinated by hydrangeas. And suddenly I understood something. I was not the one exposed. They were. My mother stepped closer. Tessa, please. Not honey now. My actual name. A rare sign of panic. I'm changing tomorrow, I said. The words hit the courtyard like dropped silverware. Changing what? She asked. The seating, the processional, the speeches, the photo list, all of it. Paige stared at me. You can't be serious. Watch me. Bree's pen was already in her hand. Noah turned to her. We're removing all parent speeches. She nodded. And revising pre-ceremony access. Another nod. My mother's voice sharpened. You are not cutting me out of your wedding over a misunderstanding. I'm cutting you out over a pattern. People understand patterns. Even strangers do. Everyone has known some version of this. An aunt, a boss, an ex, a parent. One ugly moment can be rationalized. A pattern cannot. My Aunt Cheryl stood then. She wore a structured navy blazer to a rehearsal dinner because she had never trusted any situation where people might mistake softness for surrender. Cheryl kept receipts, literal and emotional. Renee, enough, she said. My mother swung toward her. Cheryl, stay out of it. Cheryl didn't blink. I stayed out of it when Tessa was 16 and you missed her award banquet because Paige needed help choosing a homecoming dress. I stayed out of it when Tessa spent half a day at the DMV fixing the title problem on your car because Paige gets overwhelmed by forms. I stayed out of it when Tessa handled the county filing on your refinance and you told people Paige brought everyone together. I am not staying out of this one. There is nothing like a witness with dates. The color left my mother's face. My father sat down heavily. Paige whispered, Aunt Cheryl? No, Cheryl said. You were old enough to know the difference years ago. Favoritism survives on performance from one child and silence from the other, and I had just withdrawn my silence. Denise looked at me. Do you want us to clear the room? I looked around again and surprised myself with the answer. No. I did not want to leave and become the dramatic bride who couldn't handle family stress. I did not want the night retold through my absence. I wanted it back, even damaged, even imperfect. Mine. So I turned to Bree. Bring dinner out, continue service, hold dessert for 20 minutes. Bree gave me the smallest professional smile. Absolutely. My mother looked stunned. Maybe she had expected tears. An exit. A collapse. Some visible proof that she had successfully broken the atmosphere beyond repair. Not tonight. Tonight I stayed standing. Noah took my hand. This time I let him. You and Paige need to leave, I said. The words were aimed at my mother. Had I meant both of them? Her chin lifted. You cannot throw your own mother out. I can remove anyone who turns my wedding into a campaign stop. Paige whispered. Mom. My mother looked around for allies and found none. Even the guests who loved spectacle had moved into that solemn, hungry silence people reserve for moral reckonings. Nobody wants to be the person publicly defending a woman who demoted the bride and then got caught balancing on a lie with documents attached. My father stood halfway. Maybe you should go. She turned on him. You coward. He absorbed it without answering. Maybe he had earned that one. Paige turned back to me. Her hands were shaking now. For 1 second I saw the child she had once been. The little girl who learned early that beauty and distress open doors and never once asked who was drafted to hold them open. But being shaped by a system does not excuse choosing it for years. Tessa, she said, can we just talk upstairs? What part do you want to explain? The award application? The caregiver lie? The part where Mom called this dinner a showcase for you? Her mouth opened. Closed. Enough. Noah gave a discreet signal to one of the venue security staff near the lobby entrance. Not dramatic. Preventive. The kind of quiet motion expensive places make when they know tonight's disaster has become tomorrow's liability if nobody intervenes. And a man in a navy jacket approached with the dead-eyed courtesy of someone who had escorted drunk groomsmen and furious exes off private property before. "Ma'am," he said to my mother, "if you'd like a moment to gather your things, I can walk you to valet." She looked ready to refuse on principle. Then she registered how many eyes were on her and recalculated. Adaptation, not warmth, had always been her strongest skill. She lifted her chin. "I hope this was worth it." "It already is." That was the last line she heard from me that night. Paige didn't cry until they reached the lobby doors. I heard one broken sound from her. Small. Furious. Shocked. Not grief exactly. More like someone discovering that public consequences are real and cannot be moisturized away. My father stayed. Maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe the cleaner version of the story would have sent him out too. But life is never cleaned in one scene. It just starts being rearranged. Dinner resumed in fragments. Waiters moved. Chairs shifted. The acoustic duo by the fireplace looked haunted, but kept playing because contracts are contracts, and rent is rent, and no one in a string-like courtyard has ever stopped an hourly musician's invoice by having a family crisis. The first few minutes felt unreal. Then something happened I had not expected. People started treating me like the bride. Noah's aunt squeezed my shoulder without advice. Alana muttered that at least the catering was too expensive to waste. Mark asked Bree for the revised toast schedule and made it sound like an ordinary logistical issue. Denise requested coffee for our table and somehow turned the act into a kind of ritual. Normalcy, when offered gently, can feel like rescue. I sat beside Noah at the head table. My plate held salmon, fingerling potatoes, asparagus. I had no appetite, but I made myself take 2 bites anyway, because my body was still here and I wanted it to understand that I had not abandoned it just because other people tried to. Noah leaned toward me. "I'm proud of you." I stared at the roses in the centerpiece. I didn't feel brave. "Good," he said. "Bravery is usually inconvenient." I laughed then. A small, real laugh. The first sound all night that felt fully mine. Across from us, Denise lifted her water glass. "To the bride," she said. Just that. Everyone nearby lifted theirs too. Not applause, not pity, a correction. Still, I touched my glass to theirs and looked down before I cried. You do not always need a room to cheer. Sometimes you just need it to stop misnaming you. Later, after plates were cleared and dessert finally came out, Bree met us near the planner's station with a revised ceremony sheet. Parent speeches removed. Mother-daughter getting ready access revoked. Family photo list split into approved and restricted. Front row seating revised. Security note added for the bridal floor. There it was, healing in American form, printed, timed, highlighted. Noah scanned the page. "Can we change the welcome table wording too?" "From," Bree asked. The original mock-up read, "The families of Tessa Whitmore and Noah Bennett welcome you." I looked at it for 1 second. Then I said, "Need to change it to, Welcome to the wedding of Tessa Whitmore and Noah Bennett. No family claim, no shared authorship, no stolen plural." Bree wrote it down, another tiny freedom. By 10:30 the room had softened into conversation again. Not shallow sparkle, something steadier, something grounded. I caught fragments near the coffee station. I had no idea. That poor girl. No wonder the toast felt wrong. Can you imagine using your daughter's wedding like that? I did not feed on it. I just let it exist. For years my mother had curated perception the way she curated centerpieces. That night, perception slipped out of her hands. After most guests left, my father found me near the courtyard fountain. Water light moved over the stone. My feet hurt. My makeup felt heavier now that the smiling was done. Upstairs, ye garment bags and tomorrow's dress waited in a room that suddenly felt far away. Dad stood with his hands in his pockets. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, he said. Good, he nodded. I kept telling myself I was preserving peace. You were preserving her comfort. That landed. He deserved it. I know, he said after a moment. Your grandmother asked me to do better before she died. I looked at him. I didn't. For a second, I saw him clearly, not just as my father, as a man who had built an entire identity around avoiding the exact moments that define a person. That didn't erase anything, but clarity rarely gives you the clean villain people want. What are you going to do now? I asked. He looked toward the empty doorway where my mother had disappeared. I don't know yet. That was honest, at least. Then don't ask anything from me while you figure it out. He swallowed, nodded. Okay. He left after that. No plea, no hug, no request to keep things together until after the wedding. Maybe he finally understood the family had only looked held together because I was standing underneath it. Upstairs in the bridal suite, Alana helped me unzip my dress while mountain dark pressed against the windows. My phone buzzed with texts, some kind, some curious, some hungry. One from Paige that said, I never wanted it to happen like this. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Intent matters. Benefit matters too. She had benefited. Alana handed me a makeup wipe. You know what scares women like your mother? She asked. Being caught? No, she said, tossing another wipe toward the trash. Being irrelevant. I looked at myself in the mirror as foundation came off in pale streaks. A bride without her public smile does not look fragile. She looks feral, not ugly, honest. I don't want revenge anymore, I said. Good, Alana replied. Because that wasn't revenge downstairs. I looked at her. It was a billing error, corrected in real time. I laughed so hard I nearly ruined what remained of my mascara. I slept maybe 3 hours. At 6:15 the next morning, winter blue light slid through the hotel curtains and woke me with a tightness in my chest that was not panic, more like aftermath. My phone showed missed calls from my mother, more from Paige. One unknown Atlanta number. A voicemail I did not open. A text from Noah. Coffee outside your door. When I opened it, and a tray sat on the carpet with 2 cups and a sticky note. You still get to have a wedding. N. That line steadied me more than any therapeutic sentence ever could have. I drank half the coffee barefoot at the window and watched delivery vans back into the service area below. Florals, rentals, cake. America loves a wedding because even grief can be scheduled if the deposit's clear. At 8, Bree arrived with an updated security list. My mother and Paige had tried after midnight to gain access to the bridal floor. Denied. At 7:30 that morning, my mother tried again through a family friend. Denied again. Paperwork. Bless paperwork. Bree handed me the printed ceremony plan. No parent readings. No mother of the bride introduction. No sister spotlight. Photo access limited. Now front row seating for Dad only if he arrived alone and remained unobtrusive. Keep it, I said. She nodded. At 10:40, while hairspray clouded the suite and one bridesmaid crawled under a chair, searching for a missing earring, my phone lit up again. Martin Bell. I stepped into the hallway. Good morning, Tessa, he said. I wanted you to know the Avery Foundation has formally suspended Paige's nomination pending review. They also requested copies of Eleanor Whitmore's corrective statement and the financial verification records. You sent them? This morning. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the wallpaper. Thank you. Your grandmother was precise, he said. That helps. Grandma had always believed in labels, duplicate copies, and keeping originals in a fireproof box. When I was 12, she told me, if someone can change the story with charm, keep records. At the time, I thought she meant appliance warranties. She meant family. There is one more thing, Martin said. Given findings in the estate file, There may be grounds to revisit a prior distribution issue tied to the Lake Cottage proceeds. I recommend we meet next week. So the buried part isn't buried anymore. Not if you don't want it to be. I looked through the hall window toward the parking lot where guests would soon arrive, adjusting ties, heel straps, children, lipstick, nerves. I don't, I said. He told me he'd call Monday. I went back into the suite. Alana looked up immediately. What? There may be more. Her smile was frightening and supportive. Excellent. The ceremony itself was beautiful, not because pain had disappeared, because it hadn't won. The lawn opened toward blue mountains. Ivory chairs lined the aisle. Eucalyptus and white roses edged the runner. The winter sun stayed kind. Noah cried before I reached him and pretended he didn't, which only made everyone love him more. My father came alone. He sat where Bree placed him. He did not ask for more. When the officiant reached the traditional place where fathers usually give away daughters like tasteful property transfers, Noah and I had already changed the wording. No ownership, no handoff, no ceremonial fiction. I walked myself. Halfway down the aisle I felt it. Not fear, not grief exactly. Space. Space where other people's version of me used to live. I married Noah in that space. Our vows were simple and ours. No tribute to family endurance. And no sentimental lie about how both our families had equally and beautifully shaped that moment. Some people shape you by loving you well. Some shape you by teaching you exactly where not to return. At the reception, Denise gave the only parent toast. Love is easy to praise in public, she said. Character is what remains when public praise disappears. We are honored to welcome Tessa, whose character has been clear to us from the beginning. That was all. No spectacle, no coded jabs, no pity, dignity. I loved her for that. Later, Noah and I cut the cake beneath warm lights while the band played something old and sweet. Kids slid under tables. Somebody's heel snapped. An uncle ordered an old-fashioned and called it dangerously smooth. Two cousins argued about which overlook on the drive-in had the best mountain view, as life kept making its ordinary little messes around us. The kind that do not require one woman to disappear so everyone else can stay comfortable. My mother did not come. Paige did not come. At 9:30, during a slower song, I slipped outside with my shoes in one hand and a plate of wedding cake in the other. The grass was cold. The mountains beyond the property lights looked like folded velvet. The hem of my dress had picked up dirt. Good. It felt earned. Noah joined me with his jacket over one shoulder and a glass of water in hand. You vanished, he said. Only a little. He handed me the water. We stood there listening to laughter drift out from the reception hall. Do you think I should feel sadder? I asked. He thought about it. I think you're confusing grief with guilt. That line stayed with me. Because he was right. I did feel grief. Real grief. For the mother I kept hoping would finally appear at each milestone and never did. For the sisterhood people talk about like inheritance, as though women simply receive it if they share blood and a childhood address. For every younger version of me who believed that being useful would one day become being loved honestly. But guilt? No. Guilt had been trained into me to keep their system stable. It did not belong in my wedding dress. The week after the wedding, the practical aftermath began. My mother sent long emails, tearful, strategic, furious. One claimed she had been ambushed by legal theatrics. Another described Paige as fragile and devastated. Another insisted family matters should never be weaponized before outsiders. I didn't read them fully. And Noah made an inbox folder called Later and moved them there without comment. Paige sent one text. I know you hate me right now. I replied, this is not about hate. It's about access. Then I blocked her. Martin met with us the following Tuesday in his office downtown. Framed certificates, terrible coffee, a fern that looked legally exhausted. He laid out property records, reimbursement summaries, probate correspondence, and finally, Grandma Eleanor's sealed corrective statement. It was 3 pages. In it, Grandma wrote that I had been her consistent caregiver, advocate, and financial support. She wrote that my mother had elevated appearance over fairness, and that Paige had accepted praise unsupported by effort. She wrote that if false narratives continued, the record should correct itself without regard for family discomfort. That sentence felt like a hand on my back from the dead. Martin also explained that funds from the lake cottage had been routed in a way that disproportionately benefited obligations tied to my mother and Paige, while shrinking what should later have formed part of my equal position under an earlier family arrangement. Not illegal enough to become television, dirty enough to matter. We began formal review. County records do not care who was the favorite. That is one of their charms. Word moved through the extended family faster than I expected. A cousin in Florida called to hear my side, which meant hear the version she could safely retell at Thanksgiving without looking uninformed. I declined. One aunt mailed Bible verses. Another sent a gift card with no note, which I respected more than any speech. The Avery Foundation withdrew Paige's nomination within 10 days. 2 weeks after that, the nonprofit where she worked placed her on administrative leave, pending review of credential representations in public bios and speaking materials. Apparently, once one polished piece comes loose, people start tugging the rest of the garment. I did not celebrate. I just stopped protecting. My father moved into a short-term furnished apartment near his office by the end of the month. At first he called it taking space. Then space became separation, then counseling, then lawyers. He offered occasional updates carefully, as though learning how not to step on fresh concrete. We had lunch once in December at a diner off the interstate. Laminated menus, burnt coffee, pancake smell in the booths. It was easier to hear honesty there. Nothing about the room invited performance. He apologized again, better than before. Still incomplete. Apologies that arrive years late usually are. I accepted lunch, not absolution. The strangest part came in the quiet after all of it. No emergency calls, no requests to just look over this one thing, no text messages at 11:47 p.m. asking if I could handle a form because I was so much better at that kind of thing. No panic disguised as dependence disguised as love. I had not realized how much of adulthood I had lived in low-grade readiness for my family's next need. When that readiness was no longer required, I felt lighter and strangely unsteady. Self-respect is peaceful. It is also unfamiliar at first. On our first married Christmas, Noah and I stayed home. Though we put white lights on the balcony, even though the HOA sent passive-aggressive emails about visible cords. We ordered takeout, wore thick socks, and watched terrible holiday movies while my phone remained blessedly quiet. At one point, I pulled the Navy folder from the safe and rested it in my lap without opening it. Noah looked over from the couch. "You okay?" "Yeah." Then, after a moment, I said, "I used to think if I explained it perfectly enough, they would finally love me honestly." He reached for my hand. Some people only know how to love what serves their reflection. That hurt because it was true. It healed because it was true. By spring, I had done something tiny and radical. I changed my emergency contact. For years, despite everything, it had still been my mother. Habit is a stubborn religion, and I changed it to Noah. Then I updated my medical forms, my work records, my life insurance, my beneficiary list, and the access sheet for the safe. All those ordinary American documents where love stops being sentimental and becomes administrative fact. Sometimes freedom looks like forms. 6 months after the wedding, I saw Paige once by accident at a grocery store. She looked thinner, less polished, realer, maybe. She froze beside a display of strawberries. "Hi," I said. "Hi." No tears, no scene, no dramatic collapse in produce. She looked at my cart. Paper towels, pasta, coffee creamer, frozen blueberries, ordinary life. "I'm in therapy," she said. I nodded. "Okay." She looked down. "I didn't know how bad it was." "You knew enough." She closed her eyes briefly, accepted that. "Yeah," she said. It was some conversations reopened doors. That one didn't. I moved toward checkout. The cashier asked if I found everything okay. America's gentlest lie. "Yes," I said, because that day, for once, I had. A year later, people still mention the wedding sometimes. Not the flowers, not the band, not the mountain view or the bourbon or the cake. They mention how calm I looked, how graceful, how dignified. They never saw the years that built that calm. The practice, the swallowing, the constant translation of pain into competence. Grace is often just exhaustion in better shoes. But that is not the whole truth anymore. What happened at my rehearsal dinner was not the beginning of my family breaking. It was the end of me volunteering as the load-bearing wall. But my mother raised a glass to the wrong daughter because she believed she still controlled the script. She believed image would outrun record. She believed I would do what I had always done. Smile, absorb, clean it up later. Let the spotlight stay where she wanted it. She was wrong. One phone call did not create the truth. It only removed her last chance to bury it. And that was enough. The rehearsal dinner became the final night my family tried to tell my story for me. The wedding the next day became the first day they no longer could.